Hello, and welcome to Leadership PRN. This is the Dalhousie Faculty of Medicine podcast for leaders, both new and established. My name is Dr. Lara Hazelton. I'm a psychiatrist with an interest in leadership and education. And today, I'm very pleased to have as a guest here, Dr. Katrina Hurley. Hi, Katrina.
Hi, how are you?
Great to have you here.
Happy to be here this morning.
So just to kind of start off, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your role in leadership, and some of your experiences as a leader?
Well, if we go way back in time, I graduated med school in Newfoundland and then headed to Halifax in 2002 to start my residency training in emergency medicine. I took the long highway on that one because I had 3 kids in residency, and I did a master's in informatics, and so that was a meandering path that took some time. So I finished up residency finally in 2009, and then since then I've been working at IWK Health in the emergency department as an emergency physician. I did a term as leader of that department, finishing up last summer. And then I transitioned into a role as Assistant Dean of Faculty Wellness.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about what that role involves?
Well, that's a good question. So, my role is it's a 0.4 in the faculty. And, I have spent the last year sort of figuring out where that fits. Where is faculty wellness in this institution? Where does it fit in the strategic plan? So I've mostly been spending time getting to know people and trying to understand, where I fit and how I can make an impact.
And is it you mentioned faculty wellness. Is the emphasis on faculty as opposed to learners?
Yes, it is an emphasis on faculty wellness. And it's really perhaps the only faculty-centric, position. There is no faculty affairs in our institution. There are faculty affairs in some other medical schools. So faculty wellness really is the only faculty-centric position that I have seen other than, CPD.
And is it promoting wellness among faculty?
Yeah, that is the idea. Now, I think there is an overlap with learning environments because, the learning environment is also the teaching and working environment. So I think that there is some synergies that are available there, but it really is about faculty wellness. And that's the clinical faculty and the non-clinical scientific faculty.
That's interesting that you mentioned both kind of the clinical and non-clinical. Do you think that there's different wellness needs for physician faculty versus, let's say, a PhD researcher who's working in the Department of Biochemistry or something?
Yeah, I think there are some differing needs. And I would be foolish to say that I totally understand what they are. It's easier for me to connect with what the needs are for the clinical faculty, but I have very much become aware that there are some unique needs that affect our scientific faculty. The consistent pressure to publish, the consistent pressure to obtain funding to keep your, research going. There have been a lot of infrastructure issues with flooding in the building, for example, availability of resources. So they have their own unique challenges that I don't feel fully tapped into yet.
And for the physicians, what would you see as some of the big wellness needs?
So big. It's so big. When it comes to faculty wellness, I think a lot of them are actually health system centered. There may be some that are specifically related to their teaching roles and their roles as educators. But I think a lot of the challenges really vary according to specialty, but often are really derived from pressures in the health system.
The challenges of beds, resources, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's a little bit different from specialty to specialty. For example, if I speak as an emergency physician, overcrowding, bed block, which is that trickle-down problem, right? Which is also a problem upstairs, but it becomes a trickle-down problem in the floor of the emergency department. That, part of that is pressure. It's resulting from access to primary care. It's a big system. Everything is interrelated. It's a big, complex mess.
Yeah. Yeah, as a clinician myself, for sure, I see some of the challenges in the healthcare system. The lack of primary care physicians, I know, really impacts us in mental health, in psychiatry, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think the medical school can help to address some of those kind of big systemic issues?
I'm not sure that the medical school realistically can address those big systemic issues. It is in the strategic plan. There is material in there about, advocating for health system transformation, for example. So we realize we have a role in advocating and pushing for change. But I don't know that there is one single solution, right? We've got a growing population, changing needs of the population, and an aging population, change in the pathophysiology of disease and our understanding of disease, in some instances how long people can live with those diseases, which means we have to follow them for longer periods. So I'm not sure that there's a single thing that would make a difference. But if we look at it as like complexity theory, you don't know what is the nudge that actually does make a difference. And so I think, every so-called drop in the bucket or every pebble when you're moving that mountain ultimately makes a difference.
I know in our department, we've appointed like a lead for wellness. Do you find that you work quite a bit with the clinical departments on their wellness programming?
We have a wellness implementation group, and so we have representatives from a variety of different departments. Not every department has sent a representative to that. Not every department has a wellness-centered role that they've identified. So I see that, with my limited resource, if I look at myself as a resource, I can't possibly impact, thousands of faculty across multiple departments. But I see a role for sort of spreading ideas, getting ideas from different departments, spreading them to each other, and supporting them in being able to roll out things in their own settings.
So we've talked about wellness. How would you define wellness?
Wellness, I think, is hard to define. I was thinking about that. In terms of, when I think about things that are most important, I think identifying and knowing what you value, being connected with what matters to you, being connected to a purpose that matters to you. I think these are things that are really central to being well. I mean, when I think about wellness, you think about like green smoothies and yoga and meditation and mindfulness and all these sorts of things. And certainly all of those things might be part of something that makes you well. But I don't think there's one definition that would fit everyone. Although if people felt that they were doing meaningful work, felt connected to the impact that they were making, not just at work, but like as a society, I feel like wellness would be more available to people.
And do you think, like for physicians, connecting to the clinical work enriches that sense of wellness?
I think there's a possibility that it can. I think that, when someone is experiencing, burnout and moral distress, that they may not feel that connection. I noticed when I was reviewing some policies recently that there was language in some of those policies that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And there are things that have well-meaning, right? So, they're talking about the importance of wellness as a tool to support patient safety, the importance of, wellness and fatigue risk management to support safe clinical care. But it made me feel like my purpose is not just to be well so I can be a better doctor. I want to be well because I'm a human being, and I want to have a life that is also, I can be a doctor, but I have a life that's not as a doctor, as a mom, as a wife, as a friend, as a daughter. So, I think it gets a little bit troubling or problematic when we frame wellness as a professional duty, when we frame it as something that's meant to mitigate risk to others. I think, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to be well for the sake of? It's not just for the sake of others. I think we get to be also well for the sake of ourselves.
That's really interesting. So wellness can almost become sort of utilitarian and serving a purpose in the system.
Yeah. And that is what I almost referred to as it's like weaponizing it a little bit. You're telling me I have a duty to be well, like I must be. that doesn't fit with what I'm imagining as possible through wellness.
Do you think that that's something that is inherent in the way we're going to talk about wellness, or do you think that that's something that's like a phase of how we've thought about wellness and it's going to shift to being a bit more centered on the individuals?
It's a good question. I think that, at some point, I looked at notes that I made a number of years ago, probably around CanMed's 2015, where the wellness appears in there as part of a professional duty. And at the time, I saw that as a win, right? A recognition that wellness was important or that it mattered. But now it's sort of shifted my thinking to it's not enough for us to frame wellness as a duty to others. Because part of the issue with that is that we see ourselves as somewhat infallible as a competent professional. You can't see my air quotes, but I'm saying, as a competent professional, I'm supposed to have this sort of infallibility or perfection. And that sort of devalues us as humans. Humans are not infallible. Humans are not perfect. And how are our learners supposed to look at us when we are presenting this facade of like the perfect, competent professional? We're not giving our learners permission to be imperfect. Doesn't give our learners permission to grow in that way. And I think it really stunts us to see us in that way. So while I saw it as a win in 2015, right now I feel like it's a little bit of a stumbling block. I think we need to be valued as human, imperfect.
What are some ways that leaders can promote wellness?
I see that there are multiple things that leaders can do to promote wellness. And I think number one is around modeling, so it's modeling yourself as an imperfect human, making it okay for others to be imperfect, right? So that's promoting sense of psychological safety, makes it possible for others to speak up when they are struggling. It makes it safe for people to have a dissenting opinion. As an example, when I first took on the role of being a leader in my department, I had the idea that I really needed to be the consummate professional and leader, big L, big example, but also that I needed to get it right. I needed to be right. And that feeling of needing to be right really gets in the way of your ability to listen. When you realize you actually don't need to be right, that the answers are out there, not always in here, then it opens you up to be able to listen more clearly. And then when, things got really difficult and I needed some time to be with my family, I made the difficult decision to say, I need this. And my team supported me. And while I felt fear initially that I might be judged for making that request, it had the opposite effect of them feeling like it made it okay for them to ask for help when they needed it. So, sometimes in those really difficult moments, you actually learn a lot that you didn't intend to learn just by being vulnerable and keeping it real. And so, keeping it real is authenticity, although I think some people find it harder to connect with the concept of authenticity, which is why I refer to it as keeping it real.
It sounds like this would be something that would benefit both the leader and the people who they're working with, right? That both the leader and those people are able to keep it real.
Yeah, I think that actually does make a big difference. Leadership is very hard. Probably you've covered that on this podcast before. It can be, very isolating and lonely. And I think that, fostering a connection with your team is good for your team. I think it's also good for the leader.
Are there other things leaders can do besides kind of showing vulnerability and promoting psychological safety? I
think those are two very important ones. I think keeping it real also extends to looking at workload and looking at what resources your team needs. I've heard of leaders, sort of drinking the Kool-Aid and, starting to, connect more with corporate ideas than with, what's going on the ground with the team. And so I think, keeping it real extends to, maintaining that connection with what's happening on the floor, what the workload is, what the resource needs are, advocating for those, recognizing, what's happening. People do need to be seen. They need you to know what's happening for them, and I think that part of being authentic is keeping a connection to that.
So knowing what's actually happening, what people are facing in their roles on the coalface, as you might say.
Yeah, and then advocating, right? There was one point where I said, there's nothing more important to me in this role than my team. And I would go to the mats for them, 100% any day of the week. There was, I will tell you a brief anecdote. It's a sort of silly anecdote, but our department was very hot, as in the temperature in the department was hot. We had multiple fans in the department. And this was around the time of COVID. And there was some buzz from above that Emerge couldn't have the fans anymore. And we had just experienced a really tragic, difficult case in the department that had brought a lot of upper leadership down into our department who then saw the fans. And the next day there was a meeting called, we need to take the fans. So, like I said, it sounds silly. I started off that meeting by saying, I'm just going to state this right now. This is a hill I'm willing to die on. We are not taking the fans. This team has just been through a lot. It's hot. We can't work in the masks and the gowns in the heat. The fans are going nowhere. You can take them. I will replace them. Right? And you know what happened? They actually fixed the temperature, which is great. But, so you have to be willing sometimes to go to the mats, even for something silly. But it sounds silly, but it had a huge meaning at the time.
And it shows that you were listening.
I was listening. I was also working in there, right? I mean, I could feel it. It wasn't trivial. It was real. And the timing of taking it, on the heels of a really difficult case would have been very hard to take.
I think that's a good point, that leaders, being involved in the actual, whether it's the clinical work or in the actual on-site where some of these pressure points are, I think gives a certain insight on what the wellness needs are for the individuals that are there.
Yeah, and then if you're not working on the front line, then you just have to have ears, right? You need to listen.
Do you have any final thoughts about what are some things that, the institution could be doing for wellness, or how we can help each other with promoting wellness in our profession?
I think one thing I haven't mentioned is knowing your resources. So that's, we can't all be everything to everyone. So we need to know the resources that are out there to provide support. And then we need to direct people to those and normalize accessing resources when necessary. I think as an academic institution, we can make a commitment to ensuring that resources continue to be available whenever possible. And those vary depending on your position in the faculty, whether they're Dalhousie-based resources, whether they're clinical-based resources, whether they're Doctors Nova Scotia-based resources. So I think knowing the resources is really important, supporting them and normalizing them. I think everything that we do to support the learning environment can indirectly be supportive of a non-toxic working and teaching environment. And so I think, rather than labeling it just as a learning environment, I think as a faculty, you almost need to flip it and be like, that's my teaching environment, that's my working environment. And that may help faculty have a deeper connection to that.
Katrina, thank you so much for coming in and speaking with us today. It's really exciting to hear some of your thoughts about wellness and some of the things that our listeners can do to really promote it in their workplaces and their environments.
Thank you.
And that's another episode of Leadership PRN. If you have ideas for topics or people that you would like to hear on podcasts produced by the Faculty of Medicine, reach out to facdev@dal.ca. Until next time, take care.